Hey, what's going on, everybody? So listen, today what I'm going to be talking about is the black male agenda regarding politics. And as more and more black males are starting to become disaffected and disenfranchised to the point that they're considering withholding their vote, I feel like it would be unfair to do so without very clearly vocalizing and enunciating exactly what the black position is, what the black male agenda is. This didn't come unprompted. Very recently, Stacey Abrams put on her website a section directly dedicated to the black male agenda. This, of course, comes on the heels of her doing some polling and discovering that her numbers were abysmal within the black male community, and finally recognizing, oh, I need to do something for them. Obviously, anytime we're going to talk about anything regarding politics, you need a proper framework, as I've mentioned in my previous videos. Can't just look at something as it is. You need to look at something as it was and maybe see what some of the influences are on why that thing is. Specifically with the black male agenda, that's something that has been incredibly continuous. The black male agenda has been 5 things. Those 5 things are housing, education, social service programs, economic opportunity, and criminal justice reform. Now, that might sound like a lot, but it really can be summed into 2 things: jobs and freedom. All 5 of those things can be encapsulated in simply jobs and freedom. Interestingly enough, that's what the March on Washington was. As you've probably heard me say in one of my previous videos, people don't ever refer to the March on Washington by what it was actually called. It was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And so I looked up a bunch of pictures from the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and the signs really do tell what exactly was being asked for. Those things were, we want decent housing. We march for jobs for all now, and a decent pay now. Civil rights plus full employment equals freedom. We march for higher minimum wage coverage for all workers now. No U.S. dole to help Jim Crow grow. We march for integrated schools now. We march for effective civil rights law now. So if you look at all of those things, they all fit really neatly into those 5 things that I laid out for. Obviously, the decent housing, civil rights plus full employment equals freedom. That has to do with economic opportunity. Really, when you boil it down, the March on Washington, all of those things fall underneath jobs and freedom. And that's what black people have been asking for. The failing of all of these individual programs and institutions and systems have left black people destitute to some degree. So what you'll often find is that very clearly black people ask for an end to all of these problems. And the very simplest way to end all of these problems is through reparations. Whenever I've discussed reparations, I've always discussed reparations as not just a direct check, though that's also needed, but a direct check, free education, and the paying off of existing student loans, interest-free mortgages, and the paying off of the old mortgage loans, which gives housing, guaranteed jobs programs, as was provided during the New Deal for white Americans, direct capital invested specifically into black businesses as a form of reparations, and of course the direct check. Now, when you do all of those things, you get the freedom that you're talking about. Following the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, we got some civil rights legislation, which clearly didn't do enough, and the conditions didn't fix. And so we ended up in the long, hot summer of 1967. There were riots all around the freaking country, and this caused some concern. White folks were starting to feel like they weren't going to be safe. In fact, one of them, Romney's dad, stated, if we don't pass this housing legislation, our streets will never be safe. This is obviously in response to the Detroit riots, which were for fair housing. But in any ways, because of all of these riots that were so pervasive, they decided to figure out, let's create a commission to study, to find out what is the cause of these riots. Otherwise, they're going to happen again and again and again. So President Johnson created a commission, which we now know as the Kerner Commission. From the Kerner Commission, we got some reports which clearly detailed what exactly these riots were about. And I took a few excerpts from that Kerner Commission to really clearly elucidate exactly what the problem was, as the commission stated, and see if any of these things were addressed. One of the key highlights from the Kerner Commission was what white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. That's still going on today. Then they said, providing employment for the swelling Negro ghetto population will require opening suburban residential areas to Negroes and encouraging them to move closer to industrial centers. Remember in my redlining video where I talked about the fact that the government subsidized the building of these white neighborhoods in these industrial centers, which allowed white people to form their white suburban areas to flee the cities, so that black people were left in the cities while the jobs in these industrial centers were near these suburban homes, which provided employment opportunity and of course gave people better schools and gave people the ability to generate wealth, because 70% of wealth comes from real estate. Then lastly, they said, we believe that the emphasis of programs should be changed from traditional publicly built slum-based high-rise projects, smaller units on scattered sites. Well, as I mentioned in that previous redlining video, during the time when the government was invested in trying to increase home ownership and housing opportunities for white Americans, what they did was they created single family units in or near these industrial centers, near these suburban areas that white people could live in, while they created high-rise projects for black people, which were not near industrial centers, so did nothing to provide them job opportunities, and really just kind of like stowed them away in an area where they didn't get any more opportunities, which of course created some of the criminality and some of the other effects that they heavily punished. So very clearly, the Kerner Commission was talking about housing and jobs, right? Housing and freedom. So when you're talking about providing employment for the swelling Negro population, that falls obviously under jobs, right? And they said the way to do this is by opening suburban residential areas to Negroes housing and encouraging them to move closer to industrial centers so that they can get those jobs. The emphasis on the program should be changed from traditional publicly built slum, which is a form of housing, based high-rise projects to smaller units on scattered sites, public housing. And so when you start talking about what this Kerner Commission report said very specifically, this is where it's causing these riots and it's going to continue to increase. Instead of them responding by actually fixing the ghettos or actually fixing the problems that were leading towards these riots and giving people these jobs and this freedom, they just decided to go ahead and let's fund more police. It's crazy, but it's almost as if like white America decided in that moment, we're not going to give them what they want, and we know that they won't shut up. So we'll just go ahead and start heavily criminalizing them so that we can quell the riots by putting people away in prison, anybody who would ever say anything. And so then that way we can fix the problem without actually having to fix the issues within the black community, which has created some of the wealth depletion that we've continued to see within the black community. Politically, you'll find that one of the clearest and most obvious ways to fix all of these issues for jobs and freedom, again, is through reparations. What's crazy about it is that there's a divide on reparations, but the divide isn't based on party. Now, you might immediately think to yourself that Republicans are anti-reparations. And while this might be true to some degree, the fact of the matter is that black Republicans are actually very pro-reparations, and obviously black Democrats are pro-reparations. What's shocking is that plenty of white Democrats are not pro-reparations. It's obvious that white Republicans wouldn't be pro-reparations, but reparations are largely divided on racial lines. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat as a black male or as a black female, you're still pro-reparations, because we've obviously understood the impact of the systemic oppression on living black people today that has caused the need for something to offset those injuries. When we start talking about the black male agenda, and it seems like most politicians kind of fall deaf about it because they know that they can get the black female vote, it still seems like it seems a little bit ridiculous. It seems almost disrespectful, because the disparity between the black female vote and the black male vote when it comes to eligible voters is only about 6%. And despite this, black male vote still outnumbers Asian male vote and Latino male vote. So it seems like the Democrat Party for a long time has counted on our vote continuously, believing that we'll never actually ask for anything tangible. Ironically, Stacey Abrams now on her platform is talking specifically about tangibles. Now, she might have a pro-reparation stance. Before today, she has actually mentioned reparations before. The problem comes is that in her thread that she did on her Twitter, she said that she was pro-reparations, but then she didn't actually discuss specifically what the reparations plan would be. She then talked about the Democrat policy of doing these things that would help the impoverished, which of course will largely go to white people, as we have seen time and time and time again, and won't fix the wealth gap, and still not directly, overtly addressing the needs and concerns of black people, and again, righting the wrong of the systemic oppression that was directly targeted at black people. So she's trying her best to walk this tightrope. She's going to say, I'm pro reparations and so on and so forth, but she doesn't really expound directly on what her intentions are for that. Part of that is possibly because reparations is a difficult thing. Not as complex as maybe some of the detractors want to make it, but we understand that it's not going to be something that a single individual is going to be able to do on their own. There does need to be an active conversation. I've found myself contributing to these kind of conversations on a regular basis when I was doing panels on Twitch, and I'm making most of my videos include details about this so that we can slowly move ourselves towards being educated about the subject of reparations, so we can have realistic conversations and realistic expectations about how we actually get there. I think the Stacey Abrams thing is exciting because for the very first time, they're starting to see a need to appeal to black men. Whereas before, they felt like they could just take these votes for granted, the Democratic Party, and we're starting to see a decent amount of black men vote Republican. Crazy to me because that's not something that I would ever recommend. It's not something I can do. The Republican Party is overtly racist. I like the idea of abstention, and that's drawn a lot of criticism from quite a few people, but let me explain why. My mother used to always make this statement, why buy the cow when the milk is free? And I think it's a really reasonable point. If I know that something is guaranteed and I have to do nothing more, why would I do more? Why would I spend my resources on something that doesn't require it in order to give me exactly what I want? Politics is very transactional. That if they know they can count on the black vote because of the egregious and overt racism of the Republican Party, like, okay, we'll just give you a few pats on the back. We'll wear some, Pan-African colors. We'll name some streets after you. We might appoint somebody black into a position. And at the end of the day, we won't give you any of the things that will actually help your community because we don't have to. That has been enough. I think finally Black America is waking up and saying, no. All of the symbolism, all of these gestures mean literally nothing because it won't give us jobs and freedom. At this point now, the needs of black people are economic. They have been for quite some time, but I think now we're waking up to that. While I greatly appreciate things like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I think it is the single best piece of legislation I have seen in my life. It's not enough. It is not enough to offset the damages that have already been caused by over-policing and the war on drugs and the systemic oppression in housing that have continued to plague the black community, weaponized by the federal government. With that being said, I think what's going to need to happen is that we're going to find that that more politicians are going to be recognizing, and specifically Democrats, that they have to do something for black Americans. Now, California might have gotten away with some of the things that they did from Los Angeles. We've obviously seen the anti-blackness that was there, and we saw how during the coronavirus, California catered their CARES Act specifically towards immigrant population, and I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening too. It's an incredibly blue state, but once you disenfranchise enough people, you'll start to see things change. And people think that they can depend on the Latino vote to replace us, but the Latinos are sleepers because they're actually particularly conservative as well as a people, just as black people are pretty socially conservative. So I think now the idea of withholding the vote, abstention, creates the attention-grabbing effect of someone recognizing that the power that they once held over us is no longer there. It's upon the black man to make sure that he is influencing his black woman to make sure that she understands that the vote that she's been given has not actually been effective. The Democrat Party, while dependent on that vote, is supplying nothing to us to actually offset our damage. So then encouraging them to abstain breaks up what is the single largest voting bloc in history. Let me give you some numbers really quick. Barack Obama was able to secure 96% of the black female vote. 96%. Now, I want you to consider, obviously white people are both Republican and Democrat, so they're clearly going to be divided. You never get 90% of anything, or at least we would think so. You can't get that in Asians, you can't get that in Hispanics, you can't get that in Middle Eastern North Africans, you can't get that in any other group of people. So when something is that concentrated and still not able to motivate the party that has been dependent on it to do what it needs to do, I say abstention is the best way of grabbing their attention. So I am encouraging myself, my significant other, and my followers. If you have tangibles and you recognize that the Democrat Party has been dangling this carrot on a stick for long enough, I say go ahead and withhold that vote. No tangibles, no vote. Now, that doesn't mean go to the Republican Party. They're disgusting too. But I think abstention and the final recognition that, wait a minute, they're not wholly sold over to the Democrat Party might motivate both the Republican and the Democrat Party to recognize this is actually a vote to be fought for. It's hard to blame the Republican Party for refusing to try to cater or try to obtain the black vote when the black vote has been so solidly given over to the Democrat Party that they felt like they had no chance. Now is the time for us to withhold our vote and finally say, hey, we're willing to go to the best bidder. I don't think that you can win the love of someone else. As I said already, politics is transactional. I'm willing to make these transactions. I'm willing to say, because of the fact that clearly voting for you has done nothing for us, which is why we can see the wealth gap increasing all of this time, I think it's time that we go ahead and say, well, I'll just go ahead and not play your game until you're forced to play mine. That'll do it for this video. I hope you guys appreciate it. As always, I'm more than willing to have these kind of conversations. I'm trying to really stray away from debates. And please check out my other videos where you can see that there is this. All of these videos work together concomitantly. It requires to understand the political landscape that has been laid before us that helps us to arrive to these positions. It might sound a little silly to you in the beginning to say I'm asking for something and I'm going to not vote in order to get it. But it starts making quite a bit of sense once you start recognizing how consistent the black vote has been, how little it's actually generated for us.